Hey guys, tonight we're heading deep into the dry riverbanks of Mesopotamia, where the sun bakes mud into bricks, and the only thing hotter than the climate is the tax schedule. You wake up in Uruk, yep, the real one. Not a museum diorama or video game side quest, but a full-on dust-swept city buzzing with traders, scribes, goats, and just enough bureaucratic confusion to make your modern-day spreadsheets seem gentle by comparison. The mat you've slept on is woven from reeds and smells faintly of yesterday's fish market. Your hut is simple, one room, one door, one slanted roof that creaks when the wind hits just right. There's no need for curtains. The morning sun pours in like a molten flood announcing the start of another tax day. You stretch your back, which is already a bit sore from yesterday's grain hauling, and wonder not for the first time why clay tablets have no snooze button. As you splash your face with water from a terracotta jug, a boy in the alley calls your name. You're needed at the temple complex. Again. Your heart sinks gently like a pebble into a canal. It's not that you dislike the temple scribes, it's just that they take counting very seriously. Very seriously. One time someone miscounted a token shipment and ended up weeding barley fields for a week, under the stern gaze of a priest who apparently never blinked. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also post your location and what time it is where you are. I love seeing where we all drift off from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step through the early morning market baskets of dates, goats chewing sandals, a bored man hawking fish that might have been fresh yesterday. Uruk is alive even if half the city hasn't had their beer yet, which by the way is also taxed. The temple rises ahead grand and solemn. It's not exactly quiet. Priests chant, children run messages oxen low, mournfully. But it's the spiritual and administrative heart of your world. A priest greets you with all the warmth of wet clay. He motions toward a shaded courtyard where a basket full of smooth, oddly shaped little objects awaits. Tokens, you sigh. Here we go again. Each of these tokens represents something taxed, tracked or hoarded: barley bushels, goats, workers, jugs of oil. The round ones with cross hatches, that's sheep. Triangles, barley. Cones. Larger, livestock. Though historians still argue whether they stood for one cow or a cow and her calf. It depends on the city, the temple, and sometimes which priest skipped breakfast. The system is old even by your standards. Generations ago, your great-grandmother's great-grandfather might have squatted under the same fig tree, squinting at the same odd shapes. And somehow it worked. Before writing, before alphabets, before emojis, even before taxes came with itemized receipts, there were tokens. You remember your first training session, how they told you these little clay bits were pre-numeric abstraction devices. You nodded, like you understood, though you were mostly distracted by a goat chewing on your sandal. You lift a pouch from the basket and gently shake it. It clinks like soft stone wind chimes. Inside are the daily tallies from 5 farmers who traded flax for temple credit. You're supposed to confirm that they paid their share in barley and that the amounts match what's carved into the sealed bulle, the round clay envelopes the temple uses to store transactions. Why not just write it down, you once asked. The priest had sighed. Too easy to forge ink, clay doesn't lie. And while that's debatable, you've never forgotten the way his eyes narrowed like he was personally offended by parchment. You deliver the pouch to a scribe near the temple's archive room, where rows of dusty bulle rest on stone shelves. Each sealed orb holds tokens inside a kind of prehistoric contract, one that can only be verified by cracking the shell open and counting what spills out. You wonder briefly what future archaeologists will think thousands of years from now, when they find one of these clay pouches. Will they know it represented 5 jars of fermented fish paste? Will they understand the eternal human need to track, to count, to argue over who owes what? And you laugh just a little under your breath, because in Uruk sleep comes only after taxes are paid, and there are still a few dozen tokens left to sort before your lunch break. You're barely through your morning fig when a temple messenger finds you again. He's young, barefoot, and alarmingly energetic for someone who's probably been running errands since dawn. They need you in the west courtyard, he says, chewing on a sliver of reed like it's breakfast. Something about a new system for livestock tallies. You nod and set your fig aside, brushing clay dust from your tunic. Of course there's a new system. There's always a new system. But this one apparently involves a fresh batch of tokens that look suspiciously like pebbles you'd skip across a canal. You follow the messenger past a woman trading onions for firewood and a pair of musicians arguing over which end of the lyre is up. The temple courtyard is warm, too warm, but the shade cast by its mud brick columns offers some comfort. 3 scribes huddle around a reed mat examining freshly fired clay tokens arranged in neat if slightly wobbly rows. This one of them says not looking up is the new system. You squat beside them, wiping your brow. The tokens are, well, tiny, palm size but not much larger than chickpeas. Some have ridges, some have holes, a few are shaped like miniature cones. You can't help but feel like you've stumbled into a children's game or an oddly earnest attempt at abstract art. One scribe explains rather proudly that each token now represents a standardized unit: 1 sheep, 10 goats, half a bushel of barley, and so on. Another chimes in to say that the cone-shaped ones are now being used for mixed herds, which raises the immediate question, what if it's 9 goats and a very fat sheep? The scribes blink. They hadn't thought of that. Historians still argue whether the Sumerians had a unified sense of measurement across city-states. Some believe Uruk and Lagash might have shared standards, while others insist that even the definition of bushel depended on local priestly politics and seasonal rainfall. Your personal take. No one trusts a system where 1 token might mean 10 sheep here and 7 goats and a strong breeze over there. The real brilliance, though, isn't just the shapes, it's what they lead to. These tokens aren't meant to float around forever. They get sealed into hollow clay spheres called bullae. And on the surface of each bullae impressions, you press the tokens into the soft clay before sealing it like stamping a receipt. It's physical accounting, a lockbox of math. You watch as one of the younger scribes rolls a cylinder seal across the bullae's surface. The carved stone cylinder leaves behind tiny figures, perhaps a line of worshippers, or a procession of goats, or your favorite. A scene of a man holding 2 fish while looking vaguely confused. Later, if someone disputes a tax record or claims their goat count was misfiled, you can crack open the bulla, dump the tokens out, and see exactly what was promised. In a world without ink, paper, or backup drives, this is as good as it gets. Your job now is to gather yesterday's tax pouches from the grain district and prepare them for sealing. As you do, you pass an elderly priest who hums to himself while shaping clay tokens with a bone stylus. He's been at it since before you were born and claims he can smell undercounted barley. You don't ask him how. You take a seat under a fig tree and start examining the tokens. There's a calm rhythm to it, counterarrange press into bulla. Repeat. You can almost lose yourself in it if it weren't for the occasional goat wandering into your workspace to nibble your sandals. At one point you find a strange token slightly oval with what looks like 2 mismatched indentations. No one's quite sure what it means. One scribe suggests it might be from the temple brewery. Another says it could be part of an abandoned tax experiment involving fermented lentils. That second theory makes everyone uncomfortably quiet. You set the token aside. Maybe it'll end up in the archives. Or maybe 1,000 years from now someone will find it and declare it proof of a secret Sumerian yogurt cult. Before you head back in, you glance at the western sky. The sun has climbed higher and the shade is shrinking. But your bag is full of neatly labeled pouches now, and your fingers bear the gentle dusting of the day's effort. You rise knees, popping like dry twigs, and start back toward the kiln room. There's a kind of peace in all this. You think this ancient ritual of counting and sealing, tracking and releasing. A world held together by baked earth and methodical minds. And as always, by the quiet terror of misplacing a token worth 10 sheep. You're halfway through your second pouch of barley tokens when it hits you this whole system isn't just tracking, it's thinking. A form of math, even if no one's calling it that yet. You tilt your head as you lay out a sequence, one triangle, three cones, a disc with dots. It's not just bookkeeping, it's proto-algebra with sunburns. No one has coins. No one has numbers as you know them. And yet here you are in the middle of a field creating a kind of grammar from clay. It wasn't always this refined. They say that generations ago tokens were simpler, just little lumps with no marks. But things evolve. Slowly, quietly, just like everything in Uruk. A few hundred years ago, someone decided to scratch a line onto a flat disc to show it stood for 2 goats instead of 1. Someone else tried adding a second line, then came dots, wedges, pressed symbols, and before long people were reading clay like we read text messages. You shift under the sun, pulling your shawl higher over your neck. One of the scribes joins you holding what might be the most absurd stylus you've seen all week, a carved reed that ends in a delicate triangle allegedly made from antelope bone. He's showing off. You pretend to be impressed. He starts demonstrating how a cone token can be impressed twice into 1 bullet, meaning double the livestock. You nod politely, though you're more focused on the fact that ants have found your fig stash. Historians still argue whether these symbols represent true numbers, he says, not looking up from the clay. Or if they're just pictures of quantity. You smile. He's quoting the high scribes again. The ones who sit in shaded halls debating whether a scratched triangle is philosophy or tax evasion. Your own view doesn't matter. What matters is that the barley shows up and that the tokens don't go missing. It's easy to romanticize abstraction until someone forgets to log 60 sacks of grain and the temple cook has to explain to Inanna's priests why breakfast is postponed. You lean forward and press your own symbol into the Bula 2 triangle tokens stacked with care. Behind you, a goat bleats rudely. The moment passes. You're thinking now about how this system will grow, how someday these markings might leap off the tokens and onto tablets themselves. How numbers might become words. How stories might be told in these symbols, not just transactions. It sounds wild, but not unthinkable. You remember the odd trader from Elam who brought a clay tablet filled not with tally marks, but with strange symbols arranged in rows. "It's a letter," he said, grinning through cracked teeth. "To my brother, a letter. Written clay. Not for taxes, not for sheep, for communicating." Wild. Back in the courtyard, the scribe is droning on about symmetry and token design, but your mind is wandering now. You imagine a world where scribes sit in schools not to count goats, but to argue over poetry. Where tablets hold stories, jokes, even songs. One day, you think this whole thing, these little bits of clay you carry around in pouches tied to your belt, could turn into something grand. Something that stretches beyond Uruk, beyond barley, even beyond goats. But for now, your stomach growls and your hands ache from pressing clay. You gather your sealed bulle and stack them in a wicker basket, careful not to crack the still-drying clay. They'll go to the firing kiln later to be baked hard and immortal. You glance at the scribe who's now arguing with another over whether cone tokens should be standardized across regions. Historians still argue about that. You mutter under your breath and then smile at your own joke. He doesn't notice. You leave them to their debate and head toward the temple's northern portico, where you've heard fresh beer is being ladled out in honor of today's sun position. You won't be able to drink much. You've still got another pouch of lentil tokens to verify. But even one sip will take the edge off this dry heat and this drier math. As you walk, you finger a token in your palm, small, warm, and slightly imperfect. Like everything in Uruk, really. And somehow all the more real for it. You find yourself standing near the granaries now, where the scent of dry barley hangs in the air like flour trapped in sunlight. A line of farmers shuffles forward, each holding a woven basket balanced on the hip, the contents rustling gently with every step. Some look bored, others anxious. One has clearly spent the morning trying to get goat dung off his sandals without much success. Today's your turn to assist the priest scribe in charge of tax intake. He sits cross-legged on a stone platform under a stretched linen canopy stylus. In one hand, a bowl of figs in the other. His clay tablet rests before him, already covered in neat wedge impressions. You settle beside him with your pouch of fresh tokens ready to cross-reference the real thing with the dry estimates. The process is slow. Everything in Uruk is slow, on purpose. It's as if the system was designed by someone who actively hated rushing. A man approaches his arms cradling what he swears is the right amount of barley. You scoop a handful and run it through your fingers, coarse, a little sticky, but mostly dry. The priest mutters the expected value. You check the token triangle disc. Close enough. The barley clinks as it pours into a larger storage jar. Somewhere, a scribe makes a note on a backup tablet. The man exhales like he's just passed a trial by fire. Some taxes are paid in lentils, others in onions. The most dramatic offerings involve live animals, which always ends with someone chasing a confused goat down a corridor. That you've learned is best left to the younger scribes, preferably ones who haven't polished their sandals. The granary has its own logic. Barley gets measured in heaping scoops using standard baskets, which are allegedly consistent in size, so historians still argue whether one temple's standard basket was slightly deeper than another's. Some believe there was temple rivalry over this. Others suggest basket fraud. You just think the baskets shrink after rain. Occasionally, temple workers double-check the contents by weight. A set of hanging scales, slightly crooked with age, creaks gently in the breeze. One basket is too light. The farmer swears it's full. The priest sniffs and gestures for you to fetch a counterweight shaped like a small carved frog. Naturally, you comply, trying not to laugh. Of all the things in Uruk, the frog weight might be your favorite. As the sun climbs higher, the pace slows. The air is thick now, and sweat collects in the folds of your tunic. The priest starts humming under his breath an old chant about Inanna's garden, where the barley grows itself and no tokens are required. You're midway through another pouch of records when a woman strides up, balancing a jar on her head and holding a toddler who immediately tries to eat your stylus. She's here to pay the flax tax. You offer a sympathetic nod. Flax is notoriously undervalued in temple accounts. The priest pretends not to notice as he enters a smaller count than you expected. You'll probably hear him justify it later, something about adjusting for threadability. Still, you press the token and seal the deal. Another transaction committed to clay to history. It might end up in a tablet archive. Or it might just disappear beneath someone's sandal tomorrow. There's a strange poetry to it all. The ebb and flow of goods, promises, and pressed clay. You watch as one scribe carefully wraps finished tablets in palm fiber cloth, stacking them for kiln firing. Once baked, they'll last for centuries, maybe millennia. Unless someone drops one on the walk home, which, let's be honest, happens more than it should. You hear a clatter. Speak of the devil. A junior scribe has fumbled a still soft bulla, now cracked in half, the tokens inside exposed like spilled secrets. He looks around sheepishly. You help him gather the pieces, reassuring him with a half smile. Everyone drops their first bulla. It's practically a rite of passage. The priest stands to stretch his knees, popping audibly. He mutters something about checking the northern bins and wanders off, leaving you temporarily in charge. You sit straighter, suddenly aware of your posture. The next farmer approaches, eyes flicking nervously between your stylus and the empty basket on his hip. He forgot his barley. You sigh and begin the report. You carry the broken bulla in a palm leaf tray toward the token archives, careful not to lose a single piece. The priest who usually guards this room is napping in a chair fashioned from bundled reeds, snoring softly with his head tilted at an angle that suggests divine spinal punishment. You slide past him, grateful for the quiet. Inside, it's cooler. The clay walls absorb the day's heat, and the shelves, more like grooved ledges carved straight into mud brick, are lined with bullae in varying shades of gray and brown. Some are fresh, still a bit soft to the touch. Others are rock hard and etched with transaction impressions that date back to your great-grandmother's youth. You set the cracked one gently near the repair pile. No one will deal with it today, but eventually someone will reassemble it like a patient child piecing together a jigsaw made of promises. You step back into the courtyard and stretch your arms. A novice approaches you with a new task, something about sealed tax pouches needing delivery to the Southern Ledger clerk. You nod. Of course, always another delivery. Always another tally. You pick up a leather pouch filled with rattling clay tokens and start your slow walk toward the southern wing. This pouch feels heavier than usual. A little too heavy. Suspicious, you loosen the strap and peek inside. There's a smooth clay ball the bulla, and nestled inside are more tokens than expected. You frown. The seal is still unbroken, but your gut says something's off. You pause under the shade of a date palm and tilt the bulla, gently listening to the soft clink of its contents. Just then a child sprints by, nearly knocking you off your feet, followed by a flustered apprentice who yells, "Stop him!" He stole a token pouch. You blink, glance down at yours, and suddenly realize you might be holding the wrong one. A quick swap, somewhere, possibly deliberate. You hand the pouch to the apprentice, who checks it and nods. "This one's real," he says. "Thanks." He dashes off again, barefoot and determined, vanishing down the temple corridor in a trail of clay dust and righteous indignation. You exhale a little shakily. The Sumerians may not have invented crime, but they sure made it easy to steal tax records. Back on track, you finally reach the southern clerk's post, a modest table under a linen awning surrounded by baskets of yet unprocessed pouches. The clerk, an older woman with sharp eyes and fingers stained from lamp soot, nods as you present the correct bulla. She breaks the seal with a bone tool, cracks the clay shell open like a quiet egg, and carefully lays the tokens in rows. Triangle, cone, disc, crescent. She squints at each one before grunting her approval. "Tell them to stop using crescent tokens for flax," she mutters, barely looking at you. Crescent was agreed for fish paste 3 moons ago. Still arguing about it, you ask. "Always," she says. "Historians will probably be arguing about it long after we're all dust." You smirk, but she's not wrong. Half the temple disputes seem to involve reassigning token shapes without telling anyone. 1 month a wedge might mean sheep. The next, some ambitious scribe in Lagash decides it stands for goat milk and forgets to send a memo. The result? Chaos. Quiet chaos. Very dusty chaos. She hands you a fresh set of tokens, these ones meant for collection at the fishing district, and sends you back with a scribbled note on clay: "Do not seal until fish weights verified." You nod solemnly, even though you already know someone's going to seal them early. You make your way out of the courtyard, passing by the outer gates where a goat has somehow climbed onto a mud brick wall. A temple guard pokes it half-heartedly with a reed stick, muttering oaths not fit for transcription. The goat ignores him entirely. On the way back, you pass a small shrine where a boy is offering a single barley kernel to a carved statue of Enki. He closes his eyes, whispering what sounds like an apology for bad math. You don't interrupt. There's reverence in this system, even if it's buried beneath the tedium. Clay tokens may be dull, but they hold a kind of sacred trust. Each one says, "This happened. This was promised. This was delivered." In a world without ink, truth is measured in mud and memory. And when that memory cracks like the bulla earlier, it's up to scribes like you to piece it back together. The sun is slouching toward the western horizon by the time you're summoned again, this time to assist with the temple's daily offering ceremony. Not to the gods exactly, but to their intermediaries, the statues. Yes, the divine representations that live in shadowy sanctuaries, bathed in incense and decked in fabric that's somehow always too clean for this dusty world. You're handed a small tray of token slips, clay fragments that represent contributions specifically marked for Inanna. Grain, honey, cloth. Nothing unusual. Until you notice one marked saffron. You raise an eyebrow. Someone's either very rich or very dramatic. You're assigned to the inner sanctum, cool, dim, thick with incense. The statue of Inanna towers above you, carved stone inlaid with shells and what might be lapis lazuli around the eyes. Her expression is unreadable, which is probably the idea. You lay your tray at the foot of the altar next to baskets of real offerings, bundles of dried herbs, strings of beads, a small clay jug sealed with wax. Somewhere behind you, a priest chants. You try to look reverent and not sneeze. A senior scribe approaches, nods at the token tray, and begins recording the ritual account. 3 units of barley, 1 linen swath, and saffron. He glances at you, you nod. He raises a brow, mutters. Historians still argue whether saffron even grew here, and scratches the symbol into a fresh tablet anyway. You like this, scribe? He once fell asleep mid-ritual and tried to pass it off as divine trance. No one bought it, but the excuse was so bold it became temple legend. After the ceremony, the tokens are set aside, not returned, not spent, but archived in the special Holy Ledgers section. These ones aren't baked. They're left soft and reshaped weekly, a symbolic act of renewal. You once tried to suggest baking them like the tax records, but the high priest narrowed his eyes and said, "Gods don't need receipts." Fair? Back outside, the air feels different. Evening is coming on, and Uruk has that golden glow that makes everything look more important than it is. You follow a line of junior scribes headed toward the archives with baskets of unsealed clay. Someone's dropped a stylus. Someone else is arguing about whether triangle tokens can be reused for next week's fish tally. You hum quietly and fall into step. You pass through the temple's western walkway where you glimpse something peculiar. An artist of all things carving into a bullet not with wedge marks but with little curved shapes. Not for record keeping, for beauty. Spirals, bird suns. Useless and perfect. You pause watching. He says nothing, just nods. You nod back, then move on. At the south kiln, the fire is already glowing inside the dome. The air is hotter here, tinged with smoke and scorched reeds. This is where the truth gets hardened literally, baked into permanence. One slip of the tongue becomes centuries of confusion. One missed token might confuse archaeologists long after Uruk crumbles. You help slide 3 new bully into the kiln's open mouth using a flat paddle of sun-dried wood. Each one contains a sealed truth, X amount of barley. Y amount of fish, and someone's apparently disputed goose count. Once you asked if they ever explode. The kiln master grinned and said, "Only when the gods get bored." You step back and let the heat wash over your face. It's oddly comforting. The kind of heat that silences thought, smooths wrinkles, encourages long, slow blinks. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the day's weight settle into your shoulders. Clay dust clings to your arms. The faint smell of drying ink, barley husks, and fire mix into something almost pleasant. You dream briefly softly of a world where nothing ever has to be counted again. Then a shout jolts you. Someone dropped a sealed jar meant for tonight's bread tally. You sigh and turn to help. Again. By the time you return to the main scribe's courtyard, your arms are tired. Your sandals are gathering more clay than they're repelling, and the sun has started flirting with the edge of the horizon. But your shift isn't over, not yet. One of the senior tax inspectors waves you over, eyes squinting beneath the shade of a fraying head wrap. There's an issue, he mutters, handing you a tablet with hurried wedge marks. The goat herder from the outer reed farms. His count is off. Again, you try not to groan. This is the 3rd time this moon cycle that the same herder has misremembered how many goats he owns. And somehow the number always leans in his favor. You follow the inspector through the winding back lanes of the temple complex, past the outer storehouses where jugs of beer and barley are being inventoried. You pass another team of scribes slouched under a tree, too heat-weary to even argue about token shapes. One waves lazily as you go by. The herder in question waits near the eastern reed gate. He stands beside a wooden pen home to what appear to be about 23 very disinterested goats. You count them twice, 23. Definitely not the 25 he claimed. And most certainly not the 28 he estimated by feel. He grins sheepishly when you point this out. They're small goats, he offers. 2 count as 1. He laughs at his own joke. You do not. The inspector sighs and begins the official count using the goat token's small conical shapes with a dot at the base. Each represents a full adult goat properly declared. You retrieve yesterday's pouch and show the tally. The numbers don't match, not even close. You mark the discrepancy on a fresh clay tablet and have the herder press his thumb into it. His version of a signature. He does so reluctantly, then watches you seal the tablet with a smear of oil and your own stylus mark. As you do, the inspector leans over and whispers, "Historians still argue whether they ever punished goat fraud with exile." You raise an eyebrow. "Wouldn't work," you reply. He'd just take the goats with him. The inspector snorts and nearly drops his tablet. Laughter is rare during tax season. You make your way back, shoes crunching on dry clay. As you pass the water basin, you splash some onto your arms, watching the dust spiral off in pale rivers. Everything sticks to you here: sweat, dirt, bureaucracy. At the temple gates, another commotion is brewing. 2 scribes are arguing over a grain record. Apparently, someone accidentally marked a fish token on a barley tablet. Now, an entire village's tax history is under review. You slide past them like a shadow. Not your problem. Not today. Back inside the scribe hall, a cool draft welcomes you. The thick mud brick walls keep the interior calm, like stepping into the belly of an old sleepy beast. You take your usual spot near a lampstand and begin cross-referencing the Reed Farm ledgers with the newly corrected goat figures. It's dull, deeply dull, and oddly soothing. There's comfort in the scratch of stylus against clay, in the repetition, in the knowledge that these tablets, however imperfect, form the bones of the city. Without them, no one eats, no one prays, no one knows who owes what or when. In Uruk knowledges and power, it's paperwork. One of the junior scribes passes by and drops a sticky date into your hand. A gesture of solidarity. You nod grateful, you chew slowly, savoring the sweetness as the lamp sputters beside you. You glance at the shelves. Row upon row of tablets and bullae, each one heavy with memory. And goats. So many goats. Outside the temple bell sounds once a low, hollow tone. The end of the tax window for the day. You stretch, letting your joints complain freely. Someone somewhere is singing a quiet lullaby about Enlil's storm chariot. You don't understand the words, but the melody is old and soft and laced with dust. You pack away your stylus, roll your shoulders, and head out. Tomorrow there'll be more goats, more barley, more tokens. But tonight, your only duty is to find a quiet corner and remember that not everything has to be counted. At least not yet. It's just after nightfall when you're roused again, not from sleep of course, but from the pleasant days of trying to watch the stars without falling backwards off a mud brick bench. A young scribe, nervous and out of breath, blurts the words, "No one wants to hear at this hour. We need you in the Northern Archive. There's been a discrepancy." Of course there has. You drag yourself upright, brush the starlight dust from your sleeves, and follow him down the corridor where oil lamps flicker in carved alcoves. The Northern Archive is quieter than most, colder too. It houses the monthly accounts, not the daily scramble of barley and onions, but the bigger stuff: oxen loans, harvest projections, and unfortunately, the audit reports. You arrive to find a table covered in clay shards. A priest with a forehead vein dangerously close to bursting gestures at a half-destroyed bulla. "Somebody sealed this with the wrong token count. We've got 5 missing oxen." You blink. That's not small. Oxen are no joke. They're expensive, sacred to some, and heavy in more ways than one. Temple ceremonies, plowing rotations, even marriage contracts, oxen appear in all of it. 5 missing oxen is enough to prompt a formal inquiry. Or, as you now realize, a very long evening. You squat beside the debris and start gently sorting. One shard has a cone impression, another shows half of what might have been a cylinder seal, a plowman, and a tree maybe. You recognize the priest's seal confirming at least who signed it. But the token count inside 4, not 9 as the outer bulla claimed. You frown. This isn't a miscount. This is a mismatch. Someone put the wrong tokens in the right envelope. You glance at the wax-smeared tablet listing the original transaction. The numbers are clear, 9 oxen pledged from the eastern farm. But the pouch sealed and fired contains only 4. Could it have broken before sealing someone offers? You shake your head. No fracture lines. This was sealed and baked like that. The priest mutters something unrepeatable. You pretend not to hear. Now comes the work. You retrieve the registry scroll, a long tablet etched with every major livestock transaction for the moon cycle. You trace your finger down the columns looking for anything strange, and there it is, a second entry, same day, similar amount, same donor. A separate listing, meaning he split his oxen offering into 2 parts, but only 1 pouch made it to the kiln. You follow the trail through 3 more tablets and finally find the missing bulla still unbaked, tucked behind a sack of kiln fuel. There it is. The other 5 oxen tokens, saved from being labeled missing by what you can only describe as sheer bureaucratic luck. You exhale slowly. This could have been a scandal. Instead, it's just a delay. And a story you'll definitely milk for at least a week. The priest nods in approval, though he doesn't thank you. That's not his style. Instead, he writes a new note to be etched onto the tablet margins. Clarified under Temple Review. Oxen count verified. You seal it with your stylus and your palm print. Historians still argue whether Sumerian audits were meant to maintain divine order or just terrify farmers, you say mostly to yourself. Behind you, one of the scribes chuckles and offers you half a dried fig. Either way, he says you've just saved the Eastern District from goat reassignment. You blink. What? Oh yeah, he grins. If oxen go missing, the priests reassign plow quotas to goat teams. You try, honestly. Try not to picture that. It doesn't go well. You leave the archive just before midnight. The stars now thick above you, pressed against the sky like seeds in a pomegranate. The air is cooler finally. You walk slowly, savoring the quiet, stepping around a sleeping dog that's curled up on the temple's lowest stair. You stop beside the scribe wall, where impressions of past temple workers are etched into plaster stylus, marks, name symbols, even one prank carving of a goat with a halo. You touch your fingers to the wall. Someday, maybe your name will end up here too, not for brilliance, not for divine wisdom, but for finding 5 lost oxen before someone blamed the moon. You smile and start the long, sleepy walk back to your quarters. Morning comes too fast. The reed roof above your head offers little defense against the rising sun, and the soft creak of temple bells signals yet another day of scribal tedium. You roll off your mat like a sack of undercounted barley and splash your face with water that's already warm. A messenger is waiting outside again. He doesn't speak, just holds out a palm-sized clay tablet with a note etched hastily into it. Immediate consultation required. Token-shaped discrepancy. Main hall. You mutter something unintelligible and trudge toward the temple, still chewing yesterday's thoughts about goat plowing. The hall is unusually full for this early. A semicircle of scribes huddle around a tablet on a raised stand. You squeeze between 2 novices and peer at the object of their confusion. It's a bulla, but not the usual kind. Instead of clear, repeated impressions, this one bears strange shapes. A wedge, sure, but then something resembling a spiral, and a squiggle, not a stylus mark, something carved intentionally. Is that a snake? Someone whispers. The lead scribe exhales slowly. It's a token dispute, from Lagash. He says Lagash the way someone else might say mold. Apparently, a shipment of tokens from a neighboring city arrived late last night, part of a grain exchange agreement. But their scribes, they've been using slightly different symbols for months without telling anyone. Again, This time, instead of the normal triangle for barley, they've started using a rounded spiral. Why? No one knows. A local innovation, someone mutters with all the enthusiasm of stale lentils. You step closer and examine the token. It's light, smooth, and unfamiliar, yet still obviously meant to fit within the system. There's even a neat wedge pressed into its base. You shake it gently near your ear as if it might whisper its secrets. It doesn't. Historians still argue whether the shape differences were deliberate or just laziness. The lead scribe grumbles. You offer a quiet observation or a local sculptor with too much free time. Someone snorts behind you. The priest in charge demands that a special notation be added to all Lagash origin tokens, moving forward a double dot carved beside each impression to signal their foreignness. You nod. It's a workable compromise. Until, of course, someone from Lagash forgets the double dot, which they will. As the crowd disperses, you're asked to lead a token workshop for junior scribes. Normally you'd refuse, but today you're curious to see if anyone else finds the spiral satisfying to hold. You gather your class beneath the fig tree by the temple's east wall. It's a familiar spot, just enough shade, just enough breeze, and usually fewer goats than elsewhere. You spread out a set of traditional tokens, cones, discs, triangles, and a few experimental shapes. One looks like a fish, but that might have been a mistake. You explain how each shape corresponds to a specific commodity, how each has to be uniform, otherwise things fall apart. We can't have someone paying taxes with decorative pottery shards, you say. A few chuckle. You hand out soft clay and ask them to press a barley token, then a sheep token. Most do well. One scribe accidentally creates something that looks like a snail. You keep it. It's charming. Halfway through the session, one student raises a hand. Why don't we just write down the numbers? You pause. It's a valid question. One that's been whispered more and more lately. After all, the wedge marks of cuneiform are growing in number. More scribes are carving phrases, not just tallies. Some have even begun writing names, messages, records of deals that don't rely on tokens at all. I think you say slowly it's because tokens don't lie as easily. They're physical. They can be held, counted, buried, and dug up centuries later. The student nods but still looks skeptical. But writing is faster. You don't disagree. You just press a triangle token into a slab of clay and say, faster isn't always better. Later, alone in the shade, you look at the collection of tokens you've made over the years. Some are perfect, others slightly cracked. One has your thumbprint pressed into it by accident. You've kept it anyway. You wonder what future scribes will think when tokens give way to tablets and tablets give way to whatever comes next. Will anyone remember the humble spiral from Lagash or the fish token that never caught on? Will they remember that for a brief, dusty moment, these bits of clay held the weight of a civilization? You press your finger into a soft clay disc and leave no shape, no mark, just a gentle impression of touch. And for once, that feels like enough. A hot wind whistles through the alleyways as you make your way toward the eastern ledgers, clutching your latest assignment like it might turn into a pigeon and fly away. Another day, another set of livestock numbers to verify. But this time, it's goats. Again. Specifically, a herd that's been counted 3 separate times and reported with 3 different totals, 40, 41, and lots. You stop outside a low courtyard where 2 junior scribes are arguing with a man in a dusty tunic, one finger raised dramatically. I counted them myself, he insists, gesturing at the mass of bleeding fur behind him. You peer into the pen. It's chaos. Goats on goats. Some asleep, others chewing rope, one standing triumphantly on a broken stool like he's king of Sumeria. You begin counting silently, your lips moving with each twitching ear. The inspector sighs beside you. I got 41. He swears it's 40. The scribe got 38 but stopped halfway because he got headbutted. Goat census. The noblest profession. You try again. 40. You think. Then one tiny kid leaps out from behind a pot and bleats like a clarinet. 41. See, you say? It's 41. Probably. The herder shakes his head. That one's new. Born yesterday. Doesn't count yet. You pinch the bridge of your nose. It's a goat. It breathes. It counts. He shrugs. It hasn't earned its first tax token. Technically, he's not wrong. Taxation usually applies to livestock over a certain age. But when is a goat officially a goat? Historians still argue about it. Some claim eligibility starts at 2 moons. Others insist it's based on weight or the ability to knock over a water jug with purpose. Eventually, you compromise 40 taxed goats. One noted pre-goat for next month's ledger. The herder presses his thumb into the clay tablet, still grumbling. Right that it's small but feisty, he mutters. You don't. Later that afternoon, you sit with your legs dangling over the edge of a dry canal, flipping through completed ledgers. The goat counts blur together, 39, 42, 40 again. Some tablets even feature little drawings. A goat head, a hoof print, or one infamous entry where a scribe clearly sketched a goat giving side-eye. You can't prove that one was about today's herd, but it feels right. Across the canal, you spot an older woman pounding dried lentils into flour, her movement slow and rhythmic. She hums a song you don't know, and for a moment the world feels soft clay, sun goats, and song. You jot the counts into the main ledger and carefully press your seal. 1 triangle for each taxed goat, a crescent token for the future edition. Then you lean back, letting the clay dry in your lap. As you rest, a passing novice asks if you've ever considered writing the goat counts as numbers instead of shapes. You look at him. He looks hopeful. You shake your head very slowly. They're goats, you say? They barely understand fences. We'll stick with tokens. He nods solemnly. The wisdom of ages. You head back to the archives, tablet in hand, only to be stopped by a frantic apprentice with wild eyes and a cracked tablet. The barley weights are wrong, he blurts. The north granary is off by 2 whole baskets. You groan. Because where there are goats, there's always barley. And where there's barley, there's always someone forgetting to subtract what the wind blew away. You follow him, sandals scuffing in the dust, already planning how to confirm the weights without anyone bringing up fish tokens by mistake. You pass a statue of Nabu, god of wisdom and scribes, and give him a weary salute. He doesn't answer, of course. But if he did, he'd probably just say, should have double-checked the goats. At some point during the barley reweighing fiasco, your mind drifts. Maybe it's the heat. Maybe it's the repetition. Or maybe it's just that somewhere deep in your soul you finally reached full saturation on goat counts and barley debates. You find a quiet bench beneath a patchy pergola of woven reeds and sit just for a moment. The scribes are still yelling numbers in the background. No, I said 4 scoops, not 3, but you tune them out. You stare into the mid-distance and unexpectedly begin to daydream. Not of escape, not of some exotic city or lavish temple festival. No, what you imagine is far more radical. A world without counting. No tokens, no ledgers, no clay. Just days that happen and things that exist unmeasured. Barley grows. Goats roam. People take what they need. No one argues about the age of a kid goat or whether a crescent token means onions or incense this moon cycle. It's laughable, impossible, but it lingers, this soft fantasy. It smells like warm bread and wet earth. You blink back into the present as a novice rushes past you, dropping a wedge-stamped tablet in his haste. You catch it mid-fall barely and glance at the inscription. Another list, another record. More barley, more goats. You sigh and return it without a word. You wander back to the temple, your sandals whispering against the worn clay path. The sky has shifted to late afternoon, the sun beginning its dramatic golden descent. In the courtyard, a scribe leans over a tablet stylus. Paused mid-air, eyebrows furrowed. You recognize the look. It's the weight. How many onions did he say? Again, face. You decide not to interrupt. You turn instead toward the quiet corner of the temple complex, the scribe's rest garden. It's a humble place, 2 benches, a fig tree, and a water basin that mostly works. You sit and listen to the wind pass through the reeds. Somewhere nearby, a pigeon coos like it knows secrets. And then you hear them. Voices, quiet, conspiratorial, warm with boredom. The scribes gossiping. You shuffle closer not to spy but to soak it in. Their tones are light like leaves skipping across a tablet rack. The topics predictably ridiculous. Someone claims the moon priest has been changing the barley quotas based on his dreams. Someone else swears they saw the high scribe eating offerings after dark, specifically the candied figs meant for Inanna. A third mutters, I heard he taxes the honey twice. Once for the gods, once for himself. They all snort in agreement. Historians still argue whether temple scribes were dignified bureaucrats or just very tired comedians, you murmur under your breath. The joke is half true. You join them and contribute your own story about the time you accidentally double-stamped a tablet and blame the goat for nudging your elbow. The others laugh not because it's that funny, but because it's so believable. These are your people. Clay-stained, half-sunburned, knee-deep in ledgers and still finding time to argue about whether dots or wedges look better in the margin. One scribe older than the rest leans in and whispers, "Do you ever wonder if all of this?" He gestures to the clay, the walls, the tablets is just us trying not to forget. You sit with that for a while. Because it's not about control, not really. Or even order. It's about memory. About making sure someone somewhere remembers that the barley was counted, that the goat was real, that today happened, and that maybe, just maybe, you did your job well enough to be remembered, even if no one remembers your name. The fig tree rustles overhead. A goat bleats somewhere in the distance, and the sun inches lower, bathing the courtyard in amber. You stand, stretch, and head back toward the records room, fingers ready, stylus in hand, clay waiting. Because even in a dreamless world without counting, someone still has to track the fig deliveries. By the time you return to the records chamber, the lamps have already been lit. Soft yellow flames flickering behind translucent alabaster covers, casting gentle shadows across the tablet walls. You ease into your usual corner with the practiced resignation of someone who knows exactly how long they'll be sitting there. Tonight's task: update the month's ledgers for food rations, beginning with fig paste. You open the basket of daily records and pull the first clay slip. It's from the northern kitchens, bearing the neat seal of the cook-in-chief, a chicken flapping next to a ladle. You try not to smile. He carved that himself, and it's the only seal in the archives that can reasonably be described as cheerful. As you start cross-referencing the tokens triangle for barley, oval for oil, crescent for fig paste, you hear voices again. Low, winding through the corridor like candle smoke. Not arguments this time, gossip. Delicious, half-whispered temple gossip. You shift closer to the wall's archway tablet still in hand and listen. She cheats at dice, one voice says. Counts tokens backward to throw off her opponent. Oh, and the moon priest, another adds. Uses a holy calendar that adds an extra day whenever he owes someone lentils. And did you hear a third voice murmurs about the statue tally being off? You nearly drop your stylus. Statue tally. You peek around the doorway. 3 clerks hunched over their tablets, eyes wide. One is whispering, I swear. The record said 12 votive statues, but I saw 13 in the sanctuary this morning. They go silent for a beat. Then someone asks, could one have walked in? They all chuckle but nervously. You return to your tablet heart a little lighter. It's absurd, sure. But that's part of what holds the temple together, order and superstition, scribes and secrets, all bound in clay. You continue logging the fig paste rations, scratching the crescent mark again and again. Occasionally, your stylus wobbles, and one mark looks more like a fish than a fig. You let it stand. Future historians can argue about that. Half an hour in, you take a short break and walk to the side room with the ink trials. This is where junior scribes experiment tiny brush strokes of dye, homemade pigments, even crushed beetle shells. Nothing is official, nothing is fired. It's a playground for imagination. You pass a small table where someone has drawn a priest riding a goat triumphant. You're not sure who made it, but you already like them. You return to your records and finish the day's entries. Then, as tradition dictates, you press your own stylus symbol into the clay tablet's lower corner. Yours is simple 3 vertical wedges. Not flashy, not fancy, but yours. You've used it since your first barley audit. You always will. You lean back satisfied. And then, with the ease of routine, you pull out your final task preparing the soft clay archive list for temple storage. This one doesn't get baked. It will be scraped clean and rewritten tomorrow. It's a living list always changing. Offerings in, offerings out. But even this impermanence matters. It's a different kind of memory, one that accepts forgetting as part of the system. A novice peeks in to collect the finished ledgers. You nod and hand over your basket carefully stacked. As he turns to leave, he asks, "Do you ever get tired of writing the same marks?" You look down at your fingers, dusty, dry, and ink-stained. "No," you say. Because they never mean the same thing twice. He nods slowly. Maybe he understands. Maybe he just wants dinner. After he leaves, you sit in the quiet. The temple is still alive. Soft footsteps echoing through the halls. The occasional scratch of clay against clay. A sneeze from the archive room, possibly directed at old dust or new nonsense. You take a moment and think how many records have passed through your hands. How many stories have you written by accident? Each mark a decision. Each token a trace of someone's life. You press your thumb lightly into the last soft clay tablet. No numbers, no symbols. Just a print, just presence. And for tonight, that feels like enough. Night settles like a soft shawl across Uruk, but your day isn't done yet. You've been summoned again to the Western Archive, where the barley accounts have begun behaving mysteriously. You arrive to find 2 scribes and a junior priest standing in a semicircle squinting at a waxy tablet like it might confess to theft if stared at long enough. No one of them insists tapping a wedge mark. It says 26 baskets. The priest frowns, but yesterday's tally said 28, and the delivery only had 25, mutters the other scribe, half buried in his own notes. You step forward and ask the obvious question. When was the last moon phase change? The room stills. Of course. It's one of those days. You walk to the window where a sliver of silver hangs in the sky like a shy eyelash. A waxing crescent. That means ration adjustments by sacred decree offerings shift slightly depending on the moon's phase. More for growth, less for rest. It's symbolic. Beautiful even. Horrible for math. You explain this gently to the others. They must have applied the new quota for today but compared it to yesterday's full moon tally. Different moon, different rules. The priest rubs his temple. We need a better system. You nod. We need fewer moons. He chuckles despite himself. Historians still argue whether the moon-based tax cycle improved harvest planning or just kept priests in work. You say, absently scanning the marks again. You draft a clarifying note on a fresh tablet, seal it, and pass it off to the junior scribe. Have this reviewed at the morning council, you say. Before anyone else notices the barley missing and blames the goat counters. The scribe looks like he wants to argue. Then he doesn't. Probably wise. You return to the temple yard where a candle maker is pouring beeswax into carved molds, some shaped like fig leaves, others like the goddess's eye. He offers you a half smile and a small candle stub as thanks for resolving his ration issue last week. You nod, tuck it into your pouch, and carry on. Your next stop is the Eastern Plaza, where the night ledgers are compiled, final tallies of the day's taxes. Offerings, trade values, and redistribution. It's all done by oil lamp in silence except for the scratch of styluses and the occasional muttered curse when someone drops a half-dried tablet. You join the circle of scribes and begin reviewing the temple's outflow records. One caught your eye immediately. 20. 2 jugs of barley beer, you ask. Was there a feast? The others nod. For the transporters. The traders from Elam finally arrived. Of course, traders always bring chaos. You glance at the outflow chart again. It's messy. Half the token impressions don't match the notes. Some jugs were reallocated to the kitchen, others to storage, and 2 somehow went missing entirely. They drank them, one scribe mutters. You write a small footnote, suspected celebratory consumption. It's the most polite phrasing you can manage. You turn next to the moon phase chart, double-checking how the lentil taxes shift during waxing crescents. It's maddening. A food-based algorithm written by celestial whims. Still, it's beautiful in its way, this harmony between sky and earth, even if it confuses the barley count. You make the needed adjustments and close your tablet gently, letting the soft clay harden in the night air. A breeze passes through the plaza. You lean back on your palms and stare up at the moon. You wonder if anyone else sees it not as a symbol of mystery or love or divine femininity, but simply as a scheduling device. A wobbly, glowing calendar that ruins your totals every 7 days. You smile, and as you pack up your tokens and turn toward your quarters, you hear laughter near the kitchen. Someone's telling a story, something about a miscounted fish offering that nearly derailed a wedding. You don't need the details. You already know how it ends, with someone scrambling for a stylus, and someone else swearing the fish were bigger yesterday. The day begins again, as always, with the unmistakable sound of goats being unreasonable. You shuffle into the courtyard, still half asleep, a clay tablet tucked beneath one arm and your hair only slightly flattened from sleep. A scribe waves you over. You're assigned to livestock confirmation today. You stare. Goats again. He shrugs with the weary look of a man who's long stopped questioning fate. You're led past the grain storage to the outer reeds where a cluster of assessors waits by a makeshift pen. The ground is damp from the night's dew, and the smell, an unholy mix of fur mud and barley mash, hits you like a proverb. Today's assessment involves one of the temple's most notorious goat keepers, a man whose animals have a curious habit of vanishing during tax season, only to reappear slightly fatter and completely undocumented. You greet him politely. He grins back, all confidence and sandal polish. You count. The assessors count. He presents 39 goats. You check yesterday's report. It said 41. You squint. Where are the other two? He shrugs. One had wanderlust, the other's meditating. You are not amused. The lead assessor groans. Every season with this man. You agree to a compromise. He will provide a verbal statement sworn in the presence of 3 witnesses that the goats will return. Eventually, maybe. You mark the note on a temporary ledger and prepare a token stamped with the symbol for conditional livestock, a special category created specifically for this man. You press it with a wedge that leans slightly to one side. Fitting. Historians still argue whether temple livestock tokens were a form of trust threat or just optimism someone mutters. Later, over a bowl of lentil stew, you sit with your fellow scribes and share the morning's absurdities. One recounts a farmer trying to declare a cow as a divine messenger exempt from taxes. Another claims a tablet cracked from mid-count and lost the entire month's bread rations to history. You all nod solemnly. These things happen. The conversation shifts inevitably to the goat counters. Temple law requires 2 assessors per herd minimum. It's supposed to reduce fraud. In practice, it doubles the arguments. No one trusts the goat counter, says a senior scribe. Too much wiggle room, too many opinions. You agree? Goats are more art than science. To be a proper goat counter, one must know not only how to count, but also how to spot a goat that's been counted twice, or disguised as a different goat, or replaced entirely with a suspiciously similar goat from another pen. You remember a time when a herder painted a black stripe on a white goat to pass it off as a second animal? It almost worked. Almost. You finish your stew and head toward the side archive where rejected tokens are stored. You open a small clay box and examine the odd shapes Miss Press's experimental tokens. One that's shaped like a loaf of bread with legs. You stare at that one for a long time. You select a triangle and a cone and practice pressing them side by side, imagining ways to improve the goat tracking process. 2 tokens per goat. A hoofprint alongside a stylus mark. Then you sigh, it wouldn't help. Because the problem isn't the system. It's the goats, and the people who love them too much to count them honestly. You close the archive box and return the contents to the shelf. Your hands dusty and your mind full of numbers that may or may not represent anything real. That night, you sit on your rooftop mat and gaze at the stars. The city is quiet, just the soft clink of late-night scribes filing their last ledgers, the gentle flutter of papyrus drying, and somewhere very faintly a goat. You wonder how many goats you've counted in your life, and how many of them counted you back. You wake to the sound of pottery being stacked clay on clay, soft chimes of civilization in motion. Today you've been asked to assist in the kiln house, not to shape, not to stamp, but to witness a ceremonial bake. Not every tablet gets this honor. Most are simple ledgers counted and forgotten. But a select few, those tied to legal disputes, royal exchanges, or major harvest shifts, are sealed and baked as part of the temple's permanent record. You arrive just as the sun catches the kiln's outer rim, warming the bricks to a drowsy orange glow. A boy turns the bellows. An elder scribe places the bullae on a flat paddle, sliding them gently into the heart of the dome. You watch as the fire curls around the clay. You can almost hear it whisper. It's quiet here. Even the goats are silent. A priest murmurs a blessing to Nesaba, goddess of writing. You bow your head not from piety but from habit. Some part of you has come to believe that words pressed into mud dried by time deserve reverence. The scribe beside you sighs. Some of these will outlive Uruk. You nod. It's true. The clay remembers. Long after sandals rot, barley spoils, and goats grow old, the tokens remain. It's strange to think that one day someone might hold a tablet you made and ask, who was this scribe? Why so many goats? You smile. The fire hisses and the priest withdraws the paddle. The bullae are blackened, solid, transformed. They cool slowly on a woven mat now as durable as stone. You kneel beside them and gently press a final wedge into the corner of one, a finishing mark, a breath on clay. Afterward, you return to the archive where a scribe is sorting the weak sealed records. He nods to you, then gestures at a shelf packed full of dried tokens. Want to help shelve the tribute lists? You shake your head. Not today. Instead, you walk the length of the archive, fingers brushing the clay names, promises, rations, loans, disputes, births, marriages, every crumb of 1,000 lives recorded in symbols that were never meant to be poetic but somehow are. You step outside just as the sky turns to honey. Doves coo from the rafters. A novice lights a lamp. Someone plays a reed flute badly but earnestly. A goat sneezes. You sit on the low temple wall and pull out one final clay token from your pouch, a small cone chipped at the edge, probably meant for sheep. You turn it over in your palm. It's nothing special. It's everything. You press your thumb into it once, lightly, then leave it on the wall for someone else to find. Not to count, just to wonder. And now your hands are quiet. The stylus has long been set aside. The temple yard rests beneath the silver moon, and Uruk breathes in rhythm, with the tigress slow, eternal, soft. You feel the weight of the day settle behind your eyes. Clay dust still lingers beneath your nails. The fire's warmth still glows faintly on your cheek, but none of it asks for your attention now. You've done enough. Let the tablets sit. Let the goats wander just a little. Let the barley count itself just for tonight. The wind stirs gently across your mat as you lie back and gaze upward. Stars blink into view, quiet witnesses to everything that has passed, every debt remembered, every promise made in the soft hush of clay against palm. You think of all those little tokens, simple shapes, modest but loyal, tiny archives of a city's heartbeat. Maybe someone will find them thousands of years from now and trace your wedge marks with careful fingertips. Maybe they'll smile. And maybe, just maybe, they'll fall asleep too. So rest now. No more barley, no more goats, no more scribes arguing over dots and wedges. Just the moon, the wind, and the warm silence of a world that for one perfect night needs nothing counted.